I will call the meeting to order. This is the Village of Lake Bluff Historic Preservation Commission, our regular meeting of October 16, 2020, done primarily over Zoom. We have a number of items on our agenda tonight. The most important is a discussion of changes proposed to the Historic Preservation Ordinance. Would you call the roll, please, Glenn?
Certainly. Member Bergman?
Here.
Member Church?
Here.
Member Richardson is absent. Member Nickel?
Here.
Member Liebolt is absent. Chair Kraus?
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. Let's move on to the agenda item number 2, the consideration of the August 12th, 2020 regular meeting minutes. These were distributed in our packet, and if there is no comments, I would entertain a motion to approve.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll second.
Any additional discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Certainly. Member Bergman?
Aye.
Member Church?
Aye.
Member Nickel?
Aye.
Chair Kraus?
Aye.
The motion carries.
Thank you. Agenda item number 3, the Historic Preservation Commission provides a few minutes at the beginning of every meeting for anyone in the audience who would like to address the commission on an area that is not on tonight's agenda, but is within the purview of the commission. Is there any member of the public who would like to address the commission?
Yeah. So we'll have an opportunity to talk about the proposed revisions here in a little bit. If you'd like to talk about anything else in front of the HPC, we have a mic here at Village Hall. If you're calling in, you can raise your hand at the bottom of the screen, or I believe you can dial. We don't have anyone just on the phone, so don't have to go through those instructions, but we can give it a minute in case there's anyone, and then we can move along with our agenda.
Okay, let's move on to the real topic for tonight's agenda, and that's the review of proposed revisions to the Historic Preservation Regulations. We have a slide deck that we would like to go through, so rather than reading a statement of what we've done and what we're proposing, I suggest we go right to that slide deck. There will be ample opportunity for anyone from the public who would like to comment. I would hope that we could do that at the end of the formal presentation and then go through both the people that are live in Village Hall and people that are online, and then have discussion on the part of the Historic Preservation Commission members. So Glenn, if you'd like to pull up the slide deck, and if you could take the first few slides, give us some background.
I do not have a printed copy. Certainly I can get one for you. So again, this is a meeting of the Historic Preservation Commission. It's October 14th. We're going to take a bit of time to go through some of the planning, some of the runway, if you would, that's brought us to the revisions that we've put out there that create this revised preservation ordinance, and we'll have plenty of time to talk about that. So as a brief refresher, historic preservation not new to the village, originally established, I believe, Mr. Chairman, you'll correct me, all the way back in 2003. The first commission seated a couple years thereafter. Essentially, our ordinance has 4 real features right now. The first is a significant demolition. If you have a building, if it's over 50 years old, that demolishing that building would be subject to review by the commission. Potentially that review can take up to 120 days to evaluate if it's historic, if it should be considered a landmark, and so on. Second, the village designates landmarks. We identify structures, buildings that meet one or more of a whole list of criteria for historic significance, architectural significance, social significance in the village. When we designate them, that makes them subject to review if they're changed. It also makes them subject to state and local incentives. I believe the village has made a total of 30 of these over a period of time, and there's 23.
Glenn, can I interrupt you for a moment? Can you ask the audience to mute their microphones? We have a dog barking in the background and some other people who are tapping on their desks and stuff. So can we ask people to mute their mics?
Yeah.
That way we can hear you a little more clearly.
I think we'll try to proceed. Sorry about that.
Oh, that's fine. It's just a little bit of etiquette here.
Yeah. So 23 landmarks remaining in the village. We'll talk about that more here in a sec. Again, when we have landmarks, when we make a landmark in exchange for those incentives, you're subject to advisory review. Many historic preservation ordinances on the North Shore give that commission the ability to say no. They can deny the right to demolish or deny the right to pursue changes. Here in Lake Bluff, we only impose a delay. We're looking at maximums here. You have to have the village board on board to reach these maximums. But to alter a landmark, the longest you can wait is 65 days. The longest you can wait to demolish a landmark is 150 days. Finally, we do allow that a property owner can choose to certify a landmark that can give the village the ability to say no if a property owner chooses to. No landmarks in the village have done so. In our comparables, again, not a common path. So some statistics, how we got here, what led to a review of this ordinance and to this planning process we'll talk about. An increasing number of structures in the village fall into this 50-year-old demolition period. These numbers were current in early 2019, probably a few more since then. So over half of the village's single-family residences over 50 years old. The HPC had conducted 67 demolition reviews. I don't think we've conducted any since, but the vast majority of the time, those structures are ultimately demolished. To the extent that some aren't demolished, they are brought into your review because they aren't really demolitions. They're really, gut rehabilitations or major overhauls, things we'll talk about a little bit more on the slide deck. And then finally, in the less than 20 years, 15 years or so that this ordinance has really been active and in use, you've designated 30 structures as landmarks. 7 of those have been demolished. An 8th one, the Stonebridge Manor House in the state, is pending demolition. Whether that's ultimately realized, we don't know, but again, it does not. Of those proposals received, all of them have resulted in demolition. None of them, to my knowledge, have ultimately not been demolished. So some difficulty here, some lack of effectiveness with our current rules, our current regulations. Mr. Kraus, you will have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. It's amazing what you forget to do when you're focused on something else. Thanks. I'd like to give a little bit of background on where the historic preservation ordinance amendments that we're discussing today fit in to the overall plan that the commission has been working on for a little bit close to 2 years. So the framework for preservation is a new framework that we have developed, and we're calling it Choosing Lake Bluff. The overriding concept is that we're attempting to encourage stewardship within the village, stewardship of our housing stock. And the idea is to, through branding, through publicity, through working with our partners in the real estate community, to attract buyers to Lake Bluff who are interested in Lake Bluff because it is an old place, because it has history, because it has historic concepts, because of our streetscapes, and are interested in preservation and rehabilitation. We're looking through this program to try to influence early decisions leading to a new property owner to preserve a structure rather than to demolish it and build something new. We're trying to build on branding. We're trying to fill and bridge information gaps in the marketplace. And we're trying to do this in a community-wide space. Choosing Lake Bluff looks like this. We go to the next slide. There's a lot of detail behind this that's available through the village on the village website, I believe. But this is the 4-pronged approach that we have focused on in building out our historic preservation concepts. The first is branding, and we like to think that we're talking to a person who's thinking about buying a home in Lake Bluff, has just discovered us, either through taking a drive, especially this time of the year, to look at the North Shore and the beautiful scenery, or has discovered Lake Bluff in their real estate search, or in looking for a better place to raise their family. So we want to have these concepts of stewardship built into our branding, and certainly built into the knowledge base that we want to share with our existing property owners and new property owners. This is the knowledge piece. We have developed an online database of every structure in Lake Bluff. As soon as it's final, which will be hopefully the end of this year, anyone will be able to click onto a property and get basic information about that property. Not only information about the governmental, so which high school, which elementary school, with links to those schools, links to the park district, links to the county, but also specific information about the house. So how old it is, if there's an architect that we know of that built it, if it has historical significance because of its design or because of its part in the history of the village. All that information, as well as photographs when we can, will be part of an interactive database to increase the knowledge of the history of Lake Bluff, as I said, to people who are interested in buying and for people who have been here for a while and want to know more about their particular house, their particular building. So that's the knowledge phase. Now, when we get somebody who wants to buy, I want in, they want to buy in Lake Bluff, that's where the Historic Preservation Ordinance is beginning to apply, both in terms of policies that are set in place for redevelopment and in place for incentives around rehabilitation. So the Historic Preservation Ordinance sort of identifies the philosophy of the village with respect to preserving structures that have been identified through the preservation and landmarking process. So that's a quick overview of a very complicated document, a thick document, an exciting document that I would encourage you at some point to take a look at. So let's move on to the preservation rules. So these are the ordinance changes that we've been working on for the last year at least. So there are a couple of goals. One of which is implementing Choosing Lake Bluff. So implementing this bias towards stewardship, this bias towards preservation in a couple of ways, specifically giving the village more time to review either demolitions or significant alterations of primarily structures that have been deemed landmarks within the village. So our focus here, and to be quite candid, we hope to be very aggressive in the next 3 to 5 years in landmarking those relatively small, triple handful maybe a few more than that, structures, buildings that we don't want to lose within the village without a significant amount of village input. So in an attempt to shift the discussion from demolition reviews of all structures to reviews of landmarks, we're looking to aggressively go through landmarking process over the next few years. We're also looking at historic districts. We have had discussions around historic districts for the last 20 years. They are currently not in place, and we'll give you a rationale and a structure and a framework in a few minutes. There are also administrative changes, a few of them, that are designed to make this easier to operate, to eliminate redundancy, to make it easier for a property owner to have predictable outcomes and predictable timelines. So we'll talk about a few of those that are built in to the ordinance itself. Now, the village has done quite a bit of outreach over the last 2 months, and Glenn, if you could go over those for the audience.
Sure. Yeah. So in summary, and I'd note at the start of this, of course, there could be some overlap here, 144 views or whatever. I don't know how many of those are the same person twice. perhaps Member Bergman has looked at this every day for the last 40 days in anticipation.
I do.
Exactly. But so we sent out 98 letters, outreach letters, who specifically those went to described in the cover memorandum, but that's to our current landmark owners, that's to organizations interested in preservation, that's to our local real estate offices, that's to every group of stakeholders we could, work through our recent records and try to identify to make sure they were aware of it. It's been on the front page of the village website since early September. It's been in the village's e-newsletter since early September. And then it was also included in the village president's letter and the Lake Bluff letter. That's the print newsletter that you would have received in the last week or two.
So a significant amount of outreach. We have received a modest number of letters and emails and telephone conversations and feedback. The commission has copies of all of that feedback, which we have reviewed, received up to a couple hours ago, received input from the community. So we thank you for your input. So some of the key concepts to think about as you think about the historic preservation ordinance or what we're trying to do within the village. First is that we're not looking at interiors. We're looking at the exterior architectural appearance of a building and primarily the exterior appearance from the street. So we're not particularly focused on the rear, although we do look at those as if we have an opportunity, but we're really focused on, think of it as streetscape, as what all of us enjoy about Lake Bluff as we're walking down the street and looking at the panoply of structures that we have. We're shifting the focus from concepts like a site to a very tangible and discrete feature like a building. So we're clearing up language to make it very clear when we're going through a landmark process that what we're focused on, a building rather than a site, and exterior rather than an interior appearance. And then again, a couple of the administrative changes. The ordinance makes it clear that approvals are non-transferable. So if there's an approval for a process, a demolition or a change or an alteration that is not transferable to anyone other than the current owner, there's a requirement that the owner must participate. These are primarily for demolition reviews, that the owner has an obligation to participate in the process. And then there are ways of making relatively simple changes to an application or relatively simple minor changes that can be done administratively or can be agreed upon with the consent of both the village and the property owner. So let's get right into the three primary topics. We're going to look first at demolition review, then we're going to look at landmarks, and then we're going to look at historic districts. So demolition review, on the left side is what is current, and on the right side is what's proposed. There's no change in the trigger point for a demolition review. Any structure that is 50 years old or older, that's the 1,100 and so as of 2019 that were identified in one of the prior slides, where a significant demolition request has been received by the village. That's what the second set of lines are. But any structure 50 years old or older that has a significant demolition or significant alteration request must go through a demolition review. The trigger point, 50 years and greater than 50% of exterior walls, that's a technical change designed to make it easier to determine and less expensive for the property owner to determine if there is a significant change that would trigger a meeting with the Historic Preservation Commission. The biggest change is that we are proposing at the village board's decision an additional 60 days where a demolition request could be delayed. So the concept of a demolition review is that the granting of a demolition permit can be delayed right now up to 120 days for the Historic Preservation Commission to do its work in reviewing and discussing that change with the property owner. We're suggesting that the village board be allowed to delay that demolition for up to 60 days, additional days for a maximum of 180. So the concept of demolition review hasn't changed. We're suggesting an increase in the delay period. So what happens to a structure that is worthy of landmarking within the village? We could go to the next slide.
Mr.
How does a
Chairman,
landmark designation happen?
could I make one note on this slide before we move on, just to clarify?
You certainly can.
Okay. So when we make that change from gross floor area to linear feet, in addition to making it easier for architects, something we're trying to do is, because we're concerned about exterior appearance, we're not really concerned about what's going on inside the house as much. And so when we talk about gross floor area, that's entirely what's going on inside the house. This change to the rules means that many of these demolitions that aren't really demolitions, that are really gut rehabs, that are mostly happening inside the house, but that may involve a couple changes to exterior walls or an addition or something like that, those wouldn't have to come to the HPC for review again unless it's a landmark already. So just wanted to emphasize that point.
Thank you. So what's a landmark, and how does a landmark happen within the village? So think about
Steve, you just cut out.
Joys of technical difficulties. No, I don't think he can hear us either.
Hey, nobody can hear you.
Okay, I don't know what happened. I'm not muted. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hear you now.
Huh.
You're going to have to start over, Mr. Kraus. I apologize.
Well, okay, I will. So you heard none of that. That was too bad. It's going to be hard to replicate. Okay. So what's a landmark? So a landmark is a structure, a building in Lake Bluff that has historic, social, architectural significance that makes it an important feature of the village. So what I like to think about is if I close my eyes and think of the 5 or 10 buildings as I walk through the village that I don't want to lose, that I want to see there every day that I walk through, and I want to see my kids and future residents appreciate that building. Those are the ones that we think would be eligible for landmarking. So the significant structures that add significantly to what Lake Bluff is. So how does a landmark happen? And here's the current and proposed suggestion. Not a lot of changes here. The concept is that either the property owner, and hopefully the property owner is the one making the landmark request, but the property owner or the commission or the board nominate a particular structure for landmark designation. Let me spend a minute on what might be confusing, the after 2025 lines under the proposal. So one of the things that has happened more than we would like to see within the village, and partly it's because we haven't been as aggressive in landmarking those structures that we need to landmark as we should have been, and we will be in the future. But what often happens is that one of those, triple handful of buildings that needs to be landmarked is subject to a demolition request. And then what has happened too often is that the Historic Preservation Commission and the village is scrambling to understand that building, to understand its history, and often goes through a landmarking activity in the face of a demolition permit. The most recent one was the Keck and Keck House, the Blair House on the Crabtree Farm property. And that's we think does disservice to the property owner. So what we are proposing is that, and I'll put this not in legal terms, give us 5 years as a commission and as a village to go through the necessary work of identifying and landmarking those structures that need to be landmarked. And then after that time, if there is a demolition request to a non-landmarked structure after 2025, by ordinance, the village will not be able to go through the landmarking process. The idea is we need to get it right the first time. We need to give clarity to a property owner or a purchaser that a particular structure is not and most likely will not be subject to landmark regulation. So that's the reason that that clause is there, to add some clarity to the process to a property owner. There are 2 other changes in the landmark designation. The process stays the same, but there's, first of all, a presumption that National Register properties qualify as local landmarks. We have 10, I think, National Register properties that are not local landmarks. They should be. The property owner has gone through the National Register process. So the presumption of the ordinance is that those properties should be part of the local register as well. And then finally, an obvious clause that wasn't in the first, but will be in this iteration, that if a landmark is demolished, that the landmark designation extinguishes when that structure is demolished. So what happens if a property owner wants to make changes to a landmark? That's a process called advisory review. This applies only to landmarks. It does not apply to non-landmark structures. Non-landmarks go through the demolition review that we talked about 2 slides ago. Advisory reviews apply only to landmarks. Under the current rules, alterations, the village is allowed to the Historic Preservation Commission a delay of up to 35 days, designed to understand and talk with the property owner about what those alterations may be. The Historic Preservation Commission currently has a maximum 120-day demolition delay that it can impose. The village board may extend that by 30 days. So the maximum delay currently for a demolition of a landmark within the village is 150 days. We are proposing additional time for the discussions to occur between the property owner and the village. Remember, these are landmarks. These are buildings, properties that the Historic Preservation Commission and the village board, and hopefully the property owner, have agreed are subject to special provisions as a landmark. But we are proposing an additional 60-day potential delay for alterations and an additional 245-day for a maximum 1-year delay on a potential demolition of a landmark structure within the village. All of those additional extensions that are proposed would not be of the Historic Preservation Commission. Those would be extended only by the village board to get another entity, a governmental entity in the village involved in the process of discussion around that demolition. So that's one of the 2 more significant changes that we are proposing. We are also recommending that the applicant must participate throughout the process, so must participate in discussions with the Historic Preservation Commission. There have been occasions where a property owner turns a blind ear, a deaf ear, to the commission as they try to discuss potential alternatives to demolition in the process. So that's advisory review, and the next slide summarizes the review periods. The first line are the alterations to landmarks, so that's alteration to a landmark. That's extending by village board approval an additional 30 days. The middle line is for demolitions of any structure, any building that is 50 years or older, and that's the potential addition of days in the extension category. 90 to 120, and then 180 days total. And then the last line is what we just covered. That's the demolition of protected features in a landmark. And the recommendation here is a potential 365-day total delay. I should point out that at the expiration of these delays, that the property owner is free to proceed with what they would like to do with that property, governed only by the normal building codes and zoning laws within the village. I know we'll have questions, and we'll probably talk more about that. The next page, this is a special case. It's called certification. So there is a process in the existing ordinance that allows a property owner to hold themselves and future property owners to a higher standard. So this is someone who wants their home, their building, to remain as it is after they leave it, after they sell it. In effect, they are granting to the village the authority to say no, to refuse a building permit, certainly to refuse a demolition permit, and to work only with village approval on changes, significant changes to that certified landmark. Again, there are none within the village. The process has never been used. We recommend keeping it in place. And I think it's important to reflect that most preservation ordinances in the surrounding communities, surrounding Lake Bluff, the North Shore communities especially, have only this level. Once a structure is landmarked, this is the process to get changes made to that landmark. There typically are not delay-based review processes. Moving to the last of the significant changes being suggested, and that's the creation of historic districts. So what's a historic district? So a historic district, the third bullet says, can be contiguous, which is what most of us think about as a district. It's an area that's a block long, that's 2 blocks long, that's 4 blocks square, but it's contiguous. Every structure and building within that contiguous area is deemed to be part of a district. It is reflective of a particular historical era, or of an architect, or of a streetscape, or of an owner, or of a builder. You could think of portions of Lake Bluff as being potentially part of these contiguous historic districts. Districts can also be thematic. That means the properties don't need to touch each other physically. They need to touch each other through their themes. So if you think of a thematic district, could be, again, theoretically, all original camp meeting cottages, Lake Bluff camp meeting cottages built between 1885 and 1910. So you could theoretically have a quote-unquote district that is thematic in nature. If there were, so think of Oak Park or other areas, other suburbs that have a lot of buildings built by architects. So think of all the Frank Lloyd Wright houses in Oak Park. They could be a contiguous district, or they could be thematic based on the architect. So that's the concept of thematic. The process is similar to landmarking. There's a nomination process. Nominations are made by the village board, by the Historic Preservation Commission, or by a property owner within a proposed district. There is a review process. The Historic Preservation Commission reviews, has open public meetings on the potential for a district, makes a recommendation to the village board. The village board, if they approve, it becomes a historic neighborhood, but it does not become a historic district until the property owners within that proposed district have a vote. So the final decision on whether or not a district will exist is based on the property owners on a 50% plus one of the votes to designate a historic district. So what happens if there is a historic district? So essentially, the landmark protections apply to every contributing structure within a district, and some of the provisions apply to non-contributing structures within the district. So contributing and non-contributing is part of the definition of the district. Districts could be, my preference candidly would be to have districts that only have contributing structures, that every structure within that district is contributing. But to be realistic, there may be outbuildings, there may be a brand new building in the middle of a historic area. So there is a provision for non-contributing. So you can see under the contributing column, the potential delays in alterations that are anywhere or visible from the street, and in demolitions, and the provisions that apply to non-contributing. For purposes of thinking about how a district works, think of it as the village or the Historic Preservation Commission or residents within the village make a determination and recommend and work through an area within the village that is deemed to be either historic, socially relevant, architectural-based, architect-based, builder-based, or other, to come up with a rationale for creation of a district. If that district is approved ultimately by the property owners, majority of the property owners, a district is created. The creation of that district, in effect, think of every structure within that district then as having landmark status protection. And with that, I would like to open it up for discussion. And Glenn, you're controlling, so why don't you make the decision to go with the audience or with the remote people first? It looks like Glenn's on mute.
Yes, I most certainly am. It's hard to tell with the mask,
Okay.
I know. We can, I would suggest, Mr. Chairman, we can just alternate. We'll take one in the room and then one from the call, and we can just keep going until we're through everybody.
That's great. And we appreciate all of you taking time. We look forward to your comments.
Okay. Ms. Minor, correct?
Yeah.
Yes.
When you did the random sampling, when you did the outreach?
If you want to come up and speak at the mic. I can hear you, but they can't.
Good evening. I have a question about the outreach that you did. I think on the website or on the packet maybe for tonight, it included a number of, yes. Did you include a random sampling of the targeted districts that you plan to survey later to see what the general public would have to say about this rather than the targeted audiences?
Yeah, I'll answer that. We did not, because we do not have districts in mind. I gave you a couple of examples. Those are just me. The way that we hope this works is that property owners who wish to look at historic districts will come together with their neighbors, and we'll begin to work through the process, working with the village and others to develop a district. But we don't have any districts in mind. We are looking for property owners to do the initial groundwork around districts. Quite candidly, the focus of the Historic Preservation Commission initially will be on individual landmarks within the next 3 to 5 years to have those structures protected. And hopefully, as part of that process, property owners will begin to think about the creation of a district on their own.
Thank you. Want me to keep going?
Sure.
Okay. You identified that there's an extension for the delays, or that you identified that there will be, the proposal includes additional delays. And I'm just wondering what like for the last one, where it's going from 150 days to 365 days, that's statistically significant. What problem are we trying to solve? What will be enabled by doing that delay?
There's a couple of ways to think about that. One, either it's 365-day or unlimited provisions are common in other North Shore communities. So when a structure is landmarked or when there's a district that's in place, there often is a process that looks like a certified landmark rather than a regular landmark. So that's one thing, is that we're kind of looking at the competitive, if you would, landscape. And the second part of it is really an opportunity to give the village and the village residents more time to have discussions with the property owner on what, remember this is a landmark, so we're looking at a process that was in place that determined that there is a reason, historic, social, architectural, there's a reason that the structure has been landmarked. It fits into Lake Bluff. That's kind of what a landmark is. It is symbolic of what Lake Bluff is. So we think that the removal of this symbol of Lake Bluff is so significant that we want to give an extended period of time to gather community input, recognizing, and very specifically, that the village board needs to be involved. So the village board is the one that actually has the majority of the delay. So they would be directly involved in that process. But it's really giving the community an opportunity to review and think through the potential loss of a symbol of what Lake Bluff is to a lot of people.
And when you referenced landmark designation, you had stated something like 5 to 10 buildings that are iconic. So would a use case like that be dating way back to the children's home as an example? When that was...
No, when we're talking about landmarks, we'd be talking only about existing structures.
Right, but you had, like, what is the scale to, like, of the 2,000 and some odd buildings or homes in the village? Are you talking about public buildings or primarily private buildings?
So both. So Village Hall is a landmark.
As it should be.
The train station is part of a historic district.
As it should be.
The Village Green is part of a historic district. The old East School was a landmark, then was demolished. So public buildings, the churches, for example, would probably be subject to landmark. Grace Church is a wonderful example of a symbol of the village. So yes on public and then yes on private. So those really irreplaceable private buildings that are symbolic of Lake Bluff's history.
But we're talking...
How many there are is, it's not 100. Is it 50? I don't think so. Is it 25? Maybe. Is it 10? Sure. Is it 15? Probably. We have 23 right now. The list is available in the material that was online, and Glenn can get you a copy of that. But we intend to publish a list of structures that we're looking at landmarking, like 5 in a row, that we would like to go through.
All right. And I realize I need to leave because I have to pick up my dog by 8. But I want to thank you for your time and walking me through this, and I'll follow up with you. If you could email me that, or that deck's online.
Sure. We can put it up on the village website. We'll attach it to the packet
All right.
tonight.
Thank you very much for your time tonight.
Thank you.
All right. If we have anyone joining us online on Zoom that would like to speak, at the bottom of your screen you have some Q&A buttons. You have, and we do have one. Mr. Anderson, I can give you the ability to talk, and I will. I'll read your comment here out loud first. I find it quite surprising that the commission is suggesting that homes only 50 years old be considered historically relevant. This criteria creates a moving target. It places most homes in the terraces as historic. Please explain your reasoning. And then Brad,
Sure.
if you want to unmute yourself.
And that isn't pulled out of the air. That is actually the criteria that the National Register folks use as their beginning point for potentially having a nomination for the historic designation list. So it's a national standard. We recognize that actually the 1,100 homes are going to go up dramatically as the terraces age into the 50-year process. And we're thinking through what that means for the village, what it means for historic preservation. But the 50 years is there to be consistent with national standards.
Okay. Would you like to come on up?
Thanks, Glenn. Hi, y'all. It's Susie McMurray here. I have a few questions. I live in Mr. Anderson's old house. It's over 50 years old. And I'm finding it interesting that someone who would buy my home might want to demolish it. I certainly don't think my house is a landmark status, because it's not, the architecture is wonderful, but it's not what I think you're looking at for landmark. What if you buy a house with a plaque and you don't want the plaque on it, and you want to take that off your house so that you can do what you want to your house?
So when you're saying a plaque, I assume you're meaning that it was a landmark in Lake Bluff.
Yes, and
Because the Lake Bluff History Museum also has plaques, Distinguished Home Awards. That's a different criteria. That's the History Museum process. But right now, there are 23 existing structures in the village that have been designated historic landmarks. And there is not a way in the ordinance, Glenn, I believe I'm right, there is not a way to have that landmark removed.
I would correct you there a little bit, Mr. Chairman, actually, and I'll show this on the screen. Certainly, we don't anticipate, this isn't crafted anticipating it would happen often, but there are some provisions, I'll make this a little bigger, that talk about the circumstances under which you would get rid of a landmark. So first, not to be trivial, but of course, you can just take the plaque off your house in a literal sense. You're not forced to have the plaque on there.
right.
It's a very nice plaque. With that said, you know, for sure, if you were to go through and lawfully demolish a landmark, of course, it's no longer a landmark. And then there's a process by which you can apply to repeal the landmark. So again, these three criteria are really the important ones. The first, let me scroll over a little bit so everyone can see. The first is, you know, the features have been lost, they've been destroyed, it was significant, it is no longer. The second is the designation was clearly in error. We think a house is made out of, you know, closed brickyard bricks, and instead turns out they're from Wisconsin. Or, you know, three, there was some clear procedural error. You know, we landmarked something without giving someone the requisite notice or something similar to that. Those would be the three circumstances really that this anticipates extinguishing a landmark that's still standing.
Okay. I know that the property that this particular house sits on, the guest house to this house was torn down, and were other buildings on the, you know, lots that were sold off. But it's not my property. What if your house is really a tear down, and it is probably a camp cottage? What does that do for the seller when they want to sell this house and they know that the buyer is going to come in and probably tear it out because it's probably all rotten because it's one of those old wooden ones that, you know, is going to need, you know, gazillionaire to rebuild it the way it is?
Yeah, that's a problem lots of people have faced and will continue to face. There are not many existing cottages left. But so how would the property owner, how would the future buyer think about that? So first, is it a landmark or not? If it's a landmark, then there are certain delays. Remember, all the village can do is delay a demolition. They can't deny it. under both the current and the proposed activities, unless it's certified. So what we found when we first began demolition delays is that property owners, future buyers, factored in the delay. Once they knew there was a delay, they factored that into the process of buying a house or rehabilitating the house. So we think that that will happen because the property owner retains the rights in determining what future use of that property will be. We think that that is still an important factor in a future buyer looking at the structure. The condition of the house is also important. We have looked at a lot of structures and have approved quite without much delay, have approved demolitions, even though those structures theoretically could have gone through massive influxes of money and been brought to a different standard. But it's facts and circumstances of every case. We're not looking to be punitive. The focus will be, as it should have always been, on landmarking those houses that need to be landmarked and doing them now when they're in good shape, when they're not falling down or they're not subject to a new owner wanting to demolish them, so that we can have the discussion of landmarking without facing a new buyer or financial pressure or somebody who wants to tear it down. That's the focus that we're looking at right now.
Well, are you extending the days so that you hope the property owner or the seller or the buyer would change their mind? Even if you're going to say no, or yes, you can do this, ultimately, I don't understand why it takes so long. That's just me. I don't get that part.
Yeah, so part of it, as I said before, part of it is that that's a more typical delay process in the community surrounding us. The other is that, yes, at certain times, so think of the Keck and Keck house. Think of that as an example where the village actually could have used more time to discuss alternative uses for the property, to discuss potentially how a new owner may reconfigure or may creatively use the existing zoning ordinances of the village to save an existing structure, but still build something new. We just went through a landmark application and then a change to a landmark on the east side of town, not far from where you live, where the historic portion of a structure in 1880s building was preserved, but was, I think, very creatively integrated into a brand new home. Yeah. And if you look at it, you can see what was old, you can see what was new, and it's a wonderful solution. So those are the kinds of things that take time. That took at least 6 months, maybe more. So that's why we think the delay, an additional delay, is appropriate. As long as it's communicated up front, and remember that we want everyone to understand what the rules are. We want everyone to understand that, give us 3 to 5 years, and the landmarks that we think need to be landmarked will have gone through that process, so there'll be no more surprises about landmarking a structure in the middle of a change of ownership, for example. Yeah. But we think that the 365 maximum, with the village board's approval, that's important, so that the village board is on board. We think that's a reasonable time frame to look at the potential of saving a structure that is of significance in the village.
Okay, one more question, and I also want to thank you all for your time that you give to the village. It's important for all of us. What if the village wants to landmark the house and the owner does not want that?
So under the proposals, there is no change from the existing ordinance that's been in place since the early 2000s. The village can designate a building as a landmark, even if the property owner does not agree. We would prefer that doesn't happen, but that is possible under the ordinance.
But then they're responsible to go by your rules for their the outside of their house and their plantings and everything?
Not plantings. We're not concerned about plantings. We're concerned about the exterior appearance of the structure.
Okay,
And only for significant, remember, we're only talking about significant alterations where this would really apply.
So if I may be, perhaps add a bit of clarity, Mr. Chairman. We're talking about things that
Sure, go ahead.
require a building permit. So if you're painting the outside of your house, you wouldn't have to come here. If you're making some plantings or a swale, you wouldn't have to come here. It's when you're getting into, say, let's say at the minor end, if you're talking about re-siding or porches, windows, things like that is where you would start to get into having to come for review. But you would also, it should be said, get a discount for being a landmark. It's not a tremendous amount, but it helps. If you were doing a rehabilitation, it could be substantial.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I feel that about 10 years ago, that the idea of historical districting was brought up in the village, and the village mobilized and were very much against the historical districting. And that at this time of COVID, I think people are distracted. If I talk to people in the neighborhood, they have no idea about what this is all about. Even realtors that I talk to. I've been a realtor for 30 years in Lake Bluff, and I actually feel that Lake Bluff is quite beautiful and that you've been doing a good job with the rules that you have in place. And I'm concerned that you have a situation where you have people voting in the village and they're very uninformed. And at this time, I think people are distracted, and it's not a good idea during COVID to be trying to put this through. And it's a little confusing with the voting, and if so many people vote this way or that way, and then we have a historical district with regulations that I find when I have clients who come and look at homes and there's a plaque, like I have 319 Crescent, and there was a plaque, and everybody came in and said, does this mean we're going to be really restricted? What if we want to put an addition on? And people get very concerned. I don't know whether it's going to entice buyers to come to Lake Bluff if you're putting more restrictions on the homes. I think you've done a great job with the way it is right now. That's my opinion.
Can I ask a few questions before you go, ma'am? First off, what is your name?
Jean Royster.
Jean Royster, thank you. Is the plaque on the house at 319 Crescent, does that say the Lake Bluff History Museum on the plaque?
You know, it's very, it was hard for me to hear what you said.
319 Crescent is a landmark, Member Bergman.
No, it just had an award. It was just a preservation award for the way they had maintained the home. They had done nothing to it, but they had recognized the home.
What I'm wondering is I'm on the Lake Bluff History Museum board, and I run the Distinguished Home Awards program. And we award plaques to houses that we feel the museum feels are significant houses for either historical reasons or for architectural reasons. The plaque from the museum is purely honorary.
I understand that, and I do explain that to my clients.
That's a different plaque than the plaquing system that occurs from this Historic Preservation Commission.
I,
there's two different plaques that you can get in town. So if you see a plaque that says the History Museum's name on it, that's a purely honorary plaque.
I agree with you. I'm only telling you that when people see these honorary plaques, they get concerned that they aren't going to have choices. And you were talking about opening up Lake Bluff to people and making it more welcoming because we're historically significant. And I'm finding that it's off-putting that they're concerned that they are allowed to make changes to the house, even if it's an honorary plaque.
No, you're confusing yourself.
I'm not confused by it, and I explain it to them.
Because if it's an honorary plaque, then you can do anything you want.
I explain that to them. I'm just saying that the idea of restrictions is off-putting to buyers, even with a simple honorary plaque, which does not cause a problem with what they want to do.
Okay.
Yeah, I acknowledge that there are some buyers, potential buyers, who may think differently about a landmark structure within the village. I'm just going to focus on landmarks. I also think, and the commission also thinks, that there's also potential buyers that are attracted to villages that have their sense of place, that have a active historic preservation ordinance in place. And I know there are many of those as well. So what we're trying to do is to make the village attractive to those of us who live here now, since we all have a lot of our net worth is in our homes. But we also believe, I personally believe very strongly, that a lot of the value that is Lake Bluff in terms of residential property is because of where our house sits, our neighbors, the streetscape, the nature of the homes, the old and new mix, the well-maintained homes. That, I think, is real attractive, and that's really the kind of buyer that we're looking, hopefully, to attract to the village. But,
Steve, could I say something in response to this opinion too? There have been many studies that have shown that homes that are landmarked and homes that are in historic districts actually maintain or increase their property value over similar types of homes that have not been so recognized. So once again, it's something that will appeal to a buyer who is educated possibly about those issues. And that is part of what we're trying to do as the Historic Preservation Commission to foster that education process so people do understand that we are not looking to put a lot of restrictions on them. There are plenty of historic districts, or historic preservation ordinances throughout the North Shore that are much more restrictive than what we are trying to get past here. And ours, up until now, has been definitely the weakest of everything on the North Shore, and that's what we're just trying to button things up a little bit.
thank you. Glenn, do we have more comments? Glenn, if you're talking, you're on mute again.
Right, I keep muting myself to cut down on the echo, and I keep forgetting to unmute myself too. I am very good at technology for being a Gen X, millennial, whatever I'm supposed to be. So we took a couple here in person. I've got a couple comments online. I'll read in a row and we can answer. If you're online with us, you can ask a question using the Q&A box at the bottom or ask to be recognized. We can give you the ability to talk. If you're on the phone, you can dial *9. So the first question here is from Margaret. I presume that's Margaret Miner. When you reference the vote of 50% plus one, can you comment on 50% of what is it the surveyed or responded for district, and can a household opt out of a district? I can answer that.
So I can,
or-
yeah, go ahead, Glenn.
Sure. So the way the process works is we get, the HPC would have a public hearing, so you're getting a notice there. You'd have a chance to appear at that time and make comments. Well, let's assume that that recommendation is positive. It goes to the village board. The village board would have their deliberations and then would set a caucus, so if you would. So in the communities that seek a vote of the district before they enact the district, they're all more or less variations on this. Each property owner receives a ballot by mail. It explains what's happening. You have a box that says you support the district and a box that says you oppose. In our formulation, the way to not have a district is that 50% plus one, so a majority of everyone in the district, of all those ballots that are sent out, are returned with the no box checked. So if people, essentially if people don't respond, that doesn't contribute to not establishing a district. That's a little bit of a double negative, but I hope you follow along with that. So I can talk about the other approaches if you like. There are a couple others on the North Shore. Again, many do not have a voting provision for us to compare to. This is modeled most closely after the National Register District process. Okay.
I do have a question about that.
Sure. If you can come up and ask the question there, I'm happy to answer it right there for you.
Hi, my name is Jake Lensky. Just a quick question about that voting process is that, if we're sending out ballots to 100 homeowners and you get 25 responses, you're talking about you would need 51% of that 100 landowner property owners to vote no in order to veto. So if you have, for example, if you have half of those people not responding on their ballot cards, you essentially would need every single person who responds on a ballot to say no in order to veto it. It doesn't seem to me like that's a very accurate way of measuring the popular opinion of those property owners. It seems to me that it should be flipped around, really, that you should have 51% of the property owners consent to a historic designation. It seems a little backwards there. If it's really to, give the property owners a little more control over their collective area. So, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.
Do you want me to address that? That's the National Historic Register voting process for doing that. And so this is done across the country in all of the districts that are voted in. From some of the research I've done recently, there's over 9,500 National Historic Register districts in the United States, and that's the voting process for them. So.
We have another comment?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for your time and commitment. Brett Warning. Just want to reiterate the last comment. It really does seem like it should really be flipped backwards or flipped from what it is. If you want to have the interests of the property owner kept up there where I think it should be, instead of having it by default becoming a district, and some of the people may have missed that in the mail or something like that. It just seems like it should be more the owners are doing this instead of it being placed upon the owners. And secondly, and I submitted comments on this, but just wanted to make sure that, I may have misheard Mr. Kraus earlier. For the application for the district, the way I read the material, anyone can submit an application, and hopefully I'm wrong. Like, for example, someone in California can submit an application to get the process going. I hope I'm wrong on that.
Glenn, do you want to comment?
Yeah, so, and I'll put this up on the screen real quick just to provide a little bit of information. So, on designation, if I understand your question right, this section really speaks to it. There's really just for a district, there's 3 people that can submit an application, right? So one is this commission, the second is the village board, and the third is if you're an owner within the district you're proposing, you can do that. So the museum can't send in an application, an interested party can't. It's only those 3.
Oh, excellent. That was my mistake. Thank you.
No,
I like
don't
that.
expect everyone can read 30 pages of this stuff and get it all right in the first try.
Oh,
I'm not
no,
an attorney.
thank you. Thanks so much. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
And I would offer also as one more, just as a point of information, that ballot is by certified mail. So, return receipt, you'd be signing for it. Hopefully, that would get some attention. I got a question here from Miss Deborah Fisher, a realtor in town. One, I'm concerned that more people weren't aware this topic was being discussed so thoroughly. I apologize if it was under my radar, including the August meeting, and it was under the radar of many local realtors I asked about it, who may well have good input on how this might impact homeowners' ability to sell homes and buyers' willingness to buy. 2, I was part of a Lake Bluff committee about 2 years ago. At the time, the committee discussed the 50-year threshold, seeming challenging to require the increasing number of homes that will hit that age to go through added processes. Number 3, my fear is this will potentially add handcuffs, perceived or otherwise, to homeowners, sellers, and buyers. Our community thrives as it is. It seems there is not really a problem that we are trying to solve. I ask that you have a larger discussion with the residents and local realtors, even focus groups with recent buyers or realtors on this before going forward. Thank you for your time. Again, that was Miss Deborah Fisher. I clearly don't do a good impersonation of her voice, but I think many of you have met her in your travels.
Let me respond to one of those, the 50-year threshold, and the fact that there will be a lot more residents that will hit the 50-year threshold for historic preservation review. Remember that what that 50 years triggers is a significant demolition review. So if a property owner is wanting to build a deck, is wanting to put a different addition on the house, if it doesn't impact that 50% of the floor area or of the linear feet of the exterior walls, we're not looking at an intrusive process. We're looking only at having a hearing when that significant demolition request threshold has been met. So it's not, putting a new coat of paint on a house that's 50 years old. You can still do that. You can still do what the vast majority of people are going to be doing within the village. It's just that it adds, again, this level of potential review for significant changes. I will also tell you that many of the demolition requests that the Historic Preservation Commission reviews are approved at the first hearing. It becomes a relatively straightforward process that this home, if the property owner so desires, that this home is not eligible for landmark status, or nor should it be landmarked. And if the property owner wants to demolish that property, it is within their right to do that. So remember, all these delays are maximums. Many of the meetings we have are one meeting, and that's it. And the property owner does what they want. Thanks for your comment. Glenn, do we have any other online or in-person comments?
Yes, we do. John, and if you would state your last name, we'd appreciate it for the minutes. You are able to talk.
Hi, this is Katie Davis. I live at 710 East Prospect. Our home was built in 1903, and we do have an honorary plaque from the museum. Our home was built by a significant architect that also built the building that Glenn is living in right now. That has been modified since its original construction. Several questions. How many private residencies, single family residencies, do you think might be nominated as landmark status? So far, you've only spoken of commercial type buildings.
Well, we don't know. I mean, we have ideas, and if you walk around the village, you can kind of get a sense of what might be under consideration. But if you look at, you know, the double handful, the triple handful, the quadruple handful, that's sort of, in my mind, the numbers that we're looking at. We're a small town, and the standards for landmarking should be high. And remember, it's not just architect, it's social history as well. The context of where that structure fits into the context of the village. So it's not going to be 50 new ones. It's probably not going to be 25, like I said before. When I made those comments before, those were private homes. So we will have public structures that will be landmarked as well. Open space, potentially. Lakefront Park, for example. Might be. Village Green already is part of a national historic district. So it's hard to give you that number, but it's not going to be a huge amount. And there will be significant discussion with all property owners. So the way that our concept of how this is going to work, this isn't going to be a surprise. The Historic Preservation Commission in open meeting will talk about the next 5 that we want to talk about landmarking. So that'll be a matter of public record that we think these are worthy to have discussions. The next step is contacting the property owner and asking if they wish to be involved in this process, and hopefully they all will be, at least to learn more about the property and potentially to be an active participant in the landmark process. So this is not going to happen by surprise. This will be something very open that people will understand what it is that we're going to be working on and the process that we're going to be going through.
Okay, and if you are creating these districts, my home, originally the property went all the way to the lake. So a few years ago, there was a historical home that was delayed for tear down. I have photos of my home where that home did not even exist. Then, in more recent history, in 1992, our house consisted of 3 lots, our home and a guest house. And the neighbors next to us, they bought 1.5 lots, and we still own 1.5 lots. They tore down the guest home that matched this house, and they built a house that is the age of 1992. The roof peak is grandfathered into our roof peak because of the original status. And then they bumped out further than our house, and we lost lakefront view. That's all in the past. But now, if you deem this area in a historical district, I'm under regulation of an older than 50-year-old home, and they're under the regulation of a 1992 home. And what are the implications of a historical district for the old homeowner versus the new homeowner? Is it a fair shake, or is the district flat across the board affect every home regardless of age?
So the criteria is contributing or non-contributing to the district. It hasn't anything to do with age. By the way, your home, I'm not sure how much you know of the history. Sounds like you know a lot.
Yeah.
But I think of your home as Jungle Nook. It has a very vibrant history, a very vibrant social past, very active, very active party place, actually, because the lot went all the way to the lake during the camp meeting days.
Yep, it was the first location of the Pink Rabbit Ball.
Yep.
But the point being, time that's happened in the last 125 years, the reality is that it's left me with no closet for my children because it is a summer home, not a full-time residence. And we have a very large lot, which would be attractive for expanding your home regardless of if I do it or the next buyer does it. And so I fear for these restrictions. And it's aging. So time is my enemy. I either have to address it and remodel it or restore it, or I have to sell it. And your potential restrictions, inhibit all those things. And like you said, for somebody my age, I'm distracted by raising 3 children, and my money is not going into my home. So you're potentially setting up a situation where you're deterring young families from coming into town and stewarding these places, or you're asking, an older couple that's not as distracted to come in and spend an enormous amount of money rehabbing. And I'm not saying that people don't want to do that. I'm one of those people that would love to do that. It's not in my timing at this juncture. But to be in a situation where there's potentially limitations is terrifying. This is my equity.
I hear you. I don't quite understand your concern. I think it's great that you have a long-term plan for living in the house and doing what you want to do with the house in the context of its history. The fact that its historic significance is a great beginning point. And the fact that it's going to take, it took me 30 years to get my house to where I had the vision of it when I first moved in 1975. It took me 30 years to get it to where that was what I had, the picture I had in my head. I guess I don't understand why you believe that what we're proposing would limit your ability to do that. I just, help me understand that.
Well, you've placed limitations on homes older than 50 years with 50% linear feet on the exterior and 50%, sorry, I can't remember here, 50% gross floor area on the interior. I might add that my home does not have the original floor plan because somebody came by and wrote a book about the house. She lives over on Maple, same architect. And I would also like to add that back when our house was built, Tomlinson was part of the Prairie Group with Frank Lloyd Wright, and these guys were radical. They were not welcome in very many districts because of their extreme architecture. I think we have a lot of fine new architects in town. They're doing a fantastic job of remodeling existing historical homes that could potentially become landmarks. And the process of, I understand the process of voluntarily asking for your place to be a landmark, but to put that onto somebody is a deterrent, and I think it will have an adverse reaction. I think people are going to be not willingly putting their homes up as landmarks, and they also, I don't think that it fosters progress and innovation for new existing architects. And I just don't see why you would want to involuntarily put this on anybody. The district, the, whatever you're calling the historical districts, I think we all need to know more about what those implications are. Not just that, what does the National Registry do? They're in place. Use them. They already exist. I know people in this town that have offered up their places into the National Registry for the tax break so they could afford to rehab the place. That was their passion. That was their commitment. They voluntarily did it. There's a system in place. Why do we need an additional local system saying that the people are not capable of making responsible choices when we know this village is very, very responsible? You see everybody show up in regards to Block 3, Harrison House. I was around when my mom made bumper stickers and licked 1,000 envelopes to save East School. And I ended up out at Central, which is now the elementary school. Everybody in this town does not like change. They love it the way it is. I would say the only thing that you should be fearful of is having third-party developers buy properties without being an intimate part of the community. And other than that, you let the buyer be in charge of their own property. The owner.
Yeah, and without being argumentative, that's what this ordinance does. I mean, it provides the village, the residents of the village, and I absolutely agree with you that the vast majority of the village residents are fully and wonderfully capable of thinking about how their particular home fits into the context of Lake Bluff and working with their structure within that context. And there's great examples all through the village of modern architecture appended to right next door to an older structure that looks fascinating and looks absolutely great. I would love it, by the way, if there would be more modern architecture in the village. This isn't supposed to be a completely colonial town or a camp meeting era town. It'd be great to have more of a mix as appropriate. But what we have, and I absolutely agree with you that the big risk is people, developers who don't know, don't understand, and maybe don't even care about the context of Lake Bluff, what we love about this village, coming in and doing something that when it's done, they leave, and when we look at it and we go, what in the world were they thinking? That's what we're trying, that's a big reason for doing this. Or another reason, we used to hear this all the time on the Historic Preservation Commission, where someone would come in, a new buyer in Lake Bluff would come in and wanted to tear down a house that was one of these significant structures, and they would go, well, I didn't know that. I didn't know this was important. It's a cute little house, but I need this and this and this to it. And in a lot of cases, the things that the property owner needs can be certainly done within the context of historic preservation. We're not looking at, this isn't a jewelry box where nothing can change. Things will change. We are hoping that property owners would like to make their changes in the context of the history of their structure and their village. So we're not trying to be punitive, we're trying to be protective, but still give ultimate control over the use of their property to the property owner.
Steve, could I respond to one thing the latest questioner said as well? Please remember that with the proposal, we are going to be looking at changes to 50% of the linear feet of the exterior of the house and nothing to the interior. So there will be no restrictions on what you do to the interior at all, which is not the case now because the current code does require you to look at interior floor space. And so we're actually giving the homeowner more autonomy in that regard. And if you want to add on and anything like that, that is absolutely doable. A good example is the one that Steve mentioned, that we kept an old part of the house and the homeowner probably tripled the size or maybe quadrupled the size of the house. And it really is quite interesting. And it's the one on Prospect and Moffett. So we are not trying to control what a homeowner does, only we want to preserve what's interesting about what's there, if possible.
Yeah, Janie, I'd like to add on to that also. Our speaker person, I'm sorry, ma'am, I've forgotten your name, mentioned rehabilitating the closets in the house. I'm quite familiar with your Jungle Nook house. I was in that house. My sister and I knew the children that grew up in that house in the 1960s. So we spent a lot of time in that house and certainly understand those small bedrooms upstairs and the lack of closet space. If you landmark the house yourself, or if you become part of a district that encompasses your house is in a district, you're subject to the same regulations, and as Janie just pointed out, you can blow the whole interior of the house out. Now, will be probably some limitations on moving the exterior windows around, but if you want to combine bedrooms on the second floor, add a bathroom up there, make closets, turn one of the bedrooms into a huge series of closets or something like that, there's no limitations on that. There's no limitations if you've landmarked the house or if it's been landmarked via a district. So all of those changes can occur. There's also probably, if you come before the board, your house is landmarked either on your own or as part of a district, and you say, I need some more cubic volume for my house. I want to put an addition on the back of my house. That's probably, if you have enough land back there, I'm not quite sure how big your backyard is, but if you have enough land back there, what the HPC board is going to ask is the addition that you're seeking, is it compliant with the rest of the house? Does it match that beautiful brown siding that you have on the rest of the house? If you're going to put a Mies van der Rohe glass box on the back of the house, maybe most of the people in Lake Bluff kind of wonder about that.
Well, that's an interesting point because first you mentioned house color. Would that be an issue? I know in the National Registry that is. Second of all, you mentioned modern addition.
Not an issue for the National Historic Register, nor is it an issue for the Lake Bluff standard. I mentioned that because at the moment I can't remember if your house is shingled or cedar sided.
It has horizontal batting.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
it's wood. Yeah.
It's the rhythm and pacing of the siding that makes the exterior walls of your house so interesting. The fact that Tomlinson was picking up on things that Wright was talking about and things that the rest of the 18 were talking about at that time.
Yeah. And they were progressive and
Right.
And they were innovative. So to add a modern extension, I don't think should be a restriction. I think it should be a consideration, but at some point you have to consider overreach.
So to that point, a modern extension, certainly, if that's what the property owner is looking to do, that's certainly what the Historic Preservation Commission would look at. And as you now know, after spending an hour and a half with us, ultimately the property owner could put that modern addition on a landmark property. That's ultimately their, their decision. And hopefully, if that meets the property owner's needs, and if it is within the modern definition of within context of the existing structure, that it won't take a year. That it'll take a lot less than that to go through the process. We're not looking to be punitive. We don't want to be punitive. We want people who want to live in Lake Bluff and who want to enjoy the benefits of living in a historic community to live in the house of their dreams and to be able to do what they want to do with that house. We just want to make sure that we're maintaining for future generations what makes Lake Bluff special.
Absolutely.
So we apologize if there's a perception of government overreach and punitiveness, but we're definitely not looking to do that. we're looking to be as unintrusive as possible, but still retain the context of our village.
Sure. Last comment. I just would like, I've already read it in the newsletter that came around, but could you please, before you close the meeting, review how you're going to accept additional comments before any of this is amended and potentially sent to the trustees of the village?
So
And
Glenn, if you can unmute and answer that.
Yeah, so in a big part, that depends on what the commission would like to do after you're done taking public comment and deliberating. I mean, certainly we can keep accepting written comments submitted via email, via the village website, via mail, via the white drop box outside Village Hall. You know, I can't tell you what the next steps for the process look like until you finish your discussions tonight. So.
Well, I can, without giving dates, I can give you the process. So once, assuming the Historic Preservation Commission comes to an agreement on changes to the ordinance, whether that's tonight or whether it's at some other future meeting, that recommendation would go to the village board. The village board would have a first reading discussion. Typically happens at the next meeting. They meet twice a month, first and third Mondays. So the village board would have a first reading discussion. So there's an opportunity for written comments to the village and an opportunity to participate in the village board meeting. And then there is also a second reading that typically happens 2 weeks after the first reading. So that's the process. When the Historic Preservation Commission does their work, it then goes to the village board and follows their protocols. And the dates of all those board meetings, as well as the agendas, are on the village website.
We have one more question here by text. This is Miss Ann Caldwell. She writes, I think that this woman, I presume she means Miss Davis, needs to hear that she can still do what she wants to her home. At the very worst, she will have to delay as she discusses her plans with the village.
Any other in-person or online comments?
Does not appear so, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you to everyone who participated and to the folks who either couldn't make it or wanted to have their comments in writing, which, as I said before, we have looked at and will be entered into the record of our deliberations. So with that, let me ask the trustees if any of you have, or the trustees, the commissioners, if you have any questions or additional comments about the text of the ordinance based on the discussion this evening.
Mr. Chairman, I did get one comment right as we were making the transition, if you'd like me to read it real quick.
Go ahead.
Again, from Ms. Ann Caldwell, thank you for your thoughtful and caring work on behalf of the historic integrity and charm of our lovely village. Our historic homes indeed attract attention and value. I would encourage further community education, and especially for North Shore Realtors, so that they can fully understand what a Distinguished Home Award and a plaque a national district can and cannot do for a buyer.
Thank you.
Good comments.
Yeah, that was good, very good.
Yeah, great comments.
Back to the my question to the commissioners. Any questions or anything we need to discuss?
I was just going to add to that and pull in what Janie said again. As far as education, I think we really need to begin perhaps with the realtors and letting them know the difference in those awards and what they mean. But we also need to get them some information about what is out there about home values and how historic districts or areas that have a lot of landmark homes hold their value much better than areas that don't have landmark homes or aren't historic district. And in fact, across the nation, they appreciate it at a much higher rate than areas that aren't historic. So I think there's a lot of good information that supports what we're trying to share with the village, and we just need to share that information with them.
Yeah, Glenn, can you put up page 5 of the slide? Just to emphasize that point.
Sure, just,
So part of the framework of choosing Lake Bluff is this community partnership. I probably should have mentioned what we mean by that. So the concept of working with the real estate community, with the architects in the village, with the builders in the village, is part of the vision to fill those information gaps, to give our community partners what they need and the context with which we think works in the Lake Bluff environment. Building on branding and building on Lake Bluff values and just building on the sense of community that exists in Lake Bluff that we want to keep. So it's built into choosing Lake Bluff. It's something that we definitely need to do as we roll out the website and as we potentially roll out more aggressive landmarking activities and the context of landmarking.
Okay.
Any other commissioner comments?
Yeah, to build on that a little bit, there's a great deal of information out there, national information out there on the change in property values and how National Historic Register districts increase the monetary value of neighborhoods, and also how it increases the social value of the neighborhoods.
Right.
You've heard me talk before about directing people to the City of Rockford's website. There's perhaps we need to just pull this report down and just publish it and send it to the realtors. But there's a fabulously detailed analysis in the City of Rockford analyzing the National Historic Register district that they established on the Rockford riverfront versus an area right parallel to the Rockford riverfront that's not in the district. And they showed how properties in the district had a higher percentage of building permits for building rehabilitations. They had a lower level of tear downs. They had they had a stronger business district renewal, and then a higher rate of conversions of the warehouse buildings to apartment buildings. So there's all sorts of great benefits that come when a whole city, the city the size of Rockford, encompasses a National Historic Register district. And so I think there's a lot of education that we could bring to people. Some of it's pretty dense, sometimes you have to sit down and look at some pretty nutty stuff, pretty thick stuff, but there is a lot of information out there that we can share.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. That's part of our long-term vision. But I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that, our real estate friends, they've got a tough business. And if they've got a buyer who comes in with a bias against preservation, that's what they deal with every day. That's their life. So providing information needs to be done, definitely it needs to be done in context of what our real estate community is going through. So we need to work with the community, with the real estate community, and that's really part of branding and part of reinforcing values in advance of buyers actually looking to come into town and kick the tires of a structure. So all good comments and things that we need to do. Any other commissioner comment?
Steve, when we are looking at a demolition request for a landmark, and it goes through the advisory review at the HPC, and then it moves on to the village board, they may or may not hold it for review for the full 365 days. Is that correct?
Correct. So the way that the process works, same as it does now, the timelines are different. So the HPC can currently look at the demolition for 120 days.
Right.
And may then request that the village board extend by 30. So that same process would apply. The HPC would look at the demolition. They'd have 120 days. The village board would then be able, if they choose, to extend that review by up to 245 more.
Right, if they choose. Okay.
Make it smaller, they could do anything else. So the process is the same. The two-step process, which I think is important, getting the village board involved relatively early in the process.
Okay.
Anything else from the commissioners? Okay, hearing nothing, and I would entertain a motion to recommend that the village board consider the proposed changes that the Historic Preservation Commission has made to the Historic Preservation Ordinance, or words to that effect. In essence, approving this and moving it to the village board.
I so move.
Do we have a second?
I will second.
Is there additional discussion? Hearing none, can we have a roll call vote, please?
Certainly. Member Bergman,
Aye.
Member George,
Aye.
Member Nickel,
Aye.
and Chair Kraus.
Aye. So
Motion
the
carries.
recommended changes to the ordinance will move to the village board. Glenn, I'm assuming that there'll be communication about dates when the village board is likely to review the recommended changes, and a lot of communication through the village websites and in other ways.
Yep, so we will.
Okay, let's go ahead.
Yeah, so just as a brief summary, we'll post our presentation from tonight on the village website tonight. A video should be available probably next Monday. You know, our e-newsletter for the next few weeks will keep having details on it, and the soonest the board would consider this would be their next meeting, Monday, October 26th. Again, returning to our previous conversation, we will certainly share all of the comments we received to date with the board and any we receive until they consider this item.
Okay, so the 26th is the earliest, if that works with the village board. I'd like to thank all of the residents who presented and who expressed their thoughts and concerns via email earlier this week. Thank you again very much. Let's move on to agenda item number 5, if we have commissioner or subcommittee reports. The only thing that I have is that I know Glenn has been, and his team have been working on Lake Bluff Online. And I don't know if you have a date when you think we can. So the big update is to get the terraces onto the online database and all of the scattered sites that were part of the Benjamin survey. So Glenn, do you have any update on when that will be reviewed?
Yeah, so I confess there were a couple things that I was hoping would come together for tonight in the sake of transparency. The first is I was hoping to have a very big, very impressive table of, you know, all the communities I can lay my hands on in the country to show you for some comparables. That didn't come together. And then the second was I was hoping to have Lake Bluff Online for you done, and that didn't quite come together. So the village's graduate intern, Samantha Lennox, has been working very diligently to incorporate the data from the Benjamin survey. I believe she has it done. In all honesty, I think it's on my desk to keep working through, you know, the quality assurance, quality review piece before we publish it online. So COVID has made me very.
Glenn, who is it that's working on that with you?
The intern, right?
Yeah, we have two interns in the village right now. Yeah, we have Samantha Lennox, who's our graduate assistant from UIC, and then Allison Caskey, who's been here the whole time, if she'll turn on her camera, perhaps, who's our undergraduate at Lake Forest College.
Yes.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me again.
Hello,
Yeah.
thank you for all your work.
Thank you. This is wonderful. So Glenn, when you talk about it being done, what does done all entail? What will all be on it so far?
Yeah, so this is the data set that's out there that we would need to plug into that Lake Bluff Online demo, and I'll pull up the old one. It is just one full, if I can make this work. It's just a full data set of all the parcels in the village. So before we only had surveying for part of the village. Now the Benjamin survey has finished almost all of it. And so this data set is, just brings in that survey data for the remainder of the village. Of course, there's plenty of things in there that will need to continue to be supplemented from the museum's records and other places. But this would, let me share my screen. You all may recognize
Lois,
this.
what they're doing is adding the new Benjamin survey data to the existing database. They're not doing any of the supplemental things that we have talked about over the month.
So it's not been put into that architectural survey form. It's more all of this map. Okay, great.
It is
Well,
the
this is actually the architectural survey form represented graphically.
Okay.
Go to, I don't think you'll mind, go to 710 East Prospect. Go to Jungle Run. It's right there, you can just click on it. There you go.
Don't quite have the street grid.
So
memorized.
this is the house we were talking about. We won't go any deeper than this. But it shows the house on the lot. It shows when it was built. It shows the architect, who was Webster Tomlinson, who also designed the Village Hall, also designed the, what I keep calling the Close Miller House.
Okay.
So it's taking that survey data sheet and the assessor's photograph and putting it onto the interactive data. It also will allow you to go into the actual survey record, which we won't do here. But we still need to enhance all of this with a story of what this is. I think if the survey probably called this Jungle Note because that was the well-known name in the camp meeting.
And so we'll gradually start doing that. Oh, this one. This is the form I was talking about.
Yeah.
We'll gradually start filling this out, certainly when we do the landmark applications, right?
Sure. We'll enhance this. And the idea is that for this home, there's a lot of data on this house. I mean, we could have 3 or 4 continuation sheets. This is on the history walk with some other information around it. There's a bunch of photographs that we have. So this one is an example looking at a very robust data set that is accessible by using the online tool. That's really, that's what we'll need to fill in over the years now.
Okay. That's so exciting.
Yeah.
And I would.
And that's also.
Go ahead, Mr. Chairman.
That's also part of the outreach to the real estate community, so they understand the resources that they have.
Yeah.
They have lots of great resources that I would love to see sometime, but there's another resource for them to get a Lake Bluff history view on a particular property, any property in the village.
I would add and I would emphasize, we're not talking about any of the supplemental data. We're not talking about ground truth, if you would, or facts obtained from the museum or anything else. But the data sets we're bringing in are all, it's all this data here. I mean, it's more than just the significant contributing, non-contributing letter. There's a pretty good amount of stuff that Sam has worked to bring into this, and so we're hoping it has some good value from the day we turn the switch, which, Lord willing, will be soon.
Okay, so let's make sure this is on the agenda for next month. And was that your staff report, or do you have something else?
Again, my thanks to Samantha, who's not here with us tonight, and Allison. So Sam's working on Lake Bluff Online. Allison's been working on some pulling together some information about our current landmarks and National Register properties, and they both contributed to some supporting materials you saw tonight. I'm happy to answer any questions from commissioners about goings on in the village, but I don't really have a staff report for you aside from the status of Lake Bluff online.
I have a question for Allison. As she's going through existing landmarks or existing distinguished home awards, are you using the walking tour? Because a lot of these homes are on one of the 7 walking tours that already exist, and there's some good data.
Yes, I have
Okay,
that.
great, good.
Thank you.
Steve, I have to say, it's very, it always brings a smile to my face when I'm out walking and I see people walking around with their phones and stopping in front of like homes that I know are on your tours. So thank you. Again, people seem to really enjoy that.
Yeah, we've got, actually, here's an update for you. If you walk around town, tomorrow you'll see certain sidewalk squares that have, I think, X's on them, I think. Well, that's where the commemorative plaques are going. They should be going in this week. Yeah, they should be going in this week, and as soon as they go in, there'll be another walking tour of just those 18 places.
Great.
It's
Thank you.
exciting. Yeah,
Yes.
really cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else from anyone? Glenn, anything else?
I don't believe so. I think we could, if you are ready, take a motion to adjourn.
I would accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
Second?
Motion and a second. Roll call vote, please.
Member Bergman,
Aye.
Member George,
Aye.
Member Nickel,
Aye.
Chair Kraus.
Aye.
The motion carries.
Meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Thank you.
Walk around town and look at the plaques.
1 point before everybody goes, or 2 points before everybody goes. My Stanley Anderson book should be published somewhere around the first week of November.
Wow.
So that's coming on.
So when will it be available to the public?
Hopefully the first 2 weeks of November it should be available.
Oh, okay.
Hopefully you'll begin hearing about it, hear quite a bit about it. Second thing is I have started a master's class in historic preservation at the Boston Architectural College.
Really?
That's awesome. That's amazing, Paul.
I'm learning about the philosophy and history of preservation, and I'm writing all sorts of weekly case studies and have term papers to do. Suddenly I have homework to do.
Oh my God, you just finished a book and now you're writing again.
But it's kind of fun to see a lot of the history and history background and whatnot. So hopefully I'll be bringing a lot more information to the table and able to provide answers to some of the questions that people keep raising. So
Perhaps you could do some training and seminars for us.
the architectural review standards that we have in our ordinance are promulgated by the National Historic Register people,
Right.
but was actually promulgated by UNESCO as part of the United Nations program for international preservation. So these aren't just U.S. standards, these are international standards that we are applying. So
Wow.
these are tools that are applied worldwide, not just across the country.
What school are you attending?
It's Boston Architectural College.
Interesting.
So,
Remotely, of course.
yeah.
Yeah. All right. I gotta go, folks.
Okay. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.